What if the most dangerous mission a pilot could fly wasn't in the dogfights at 30,000 feet, but just 50 feet above the ground, with the world screaming past at 400 miles per hour? What if one man, a 30-year-old California rancher who'd been kept from the war for 5 long years, decided to unleash all his pent-up fury in one of the most audacious, single-handed attacks of World War II, only to vanish from the face of the earth just 20 days before victory? Hey everyone, and welcome back to the channel. Today we're diving deep into a story of almost unbelievable courage, breathtaking skill, and a mystery that has haunted aviation history for nearly 80 years. This is the incredible and ultimately tragic story of Lieutenant Colonel Elwin Regetti, the 8th Air Force's deadliest strafing ace. What you are about to hear will redefine what you thought was possible in aerial combat. April 17, 1945. Dawn was a cold gray promise breaking over RAF Wormingford in Essex, England. Inside the plexiglass bubble canopy of his P-51 Mustang, Lieutenant Colonel Elwin Regetti's hands, gloved and sure, danced across the pre-flight checklist. The movements were fluid, economical, honed by hundreds of repetitions into a muscle memory that bordered on instinct. This was a ritual he'd performed over 100 times before, but today was different. Today was his 30th birthday. Through the canopy, he could see the silhouettes of dozens of other silver fighters, their sleek forms still silent in the damp morning quiet. Soon, their Packard Merlin engines would shatter that quiet with a glorious thrumming roar that was the sound of Allied air power. The ground crews, ghosts in the pre-dawn light, moved with practiced efficiency. On the airfields, scattered across what was left of the Third Reich, the Luftwaffe had no idea what was coming. They didn't know that in the next few hours, one American pilot, this 30-year-old rancher from California, would execute a series of strafing attacks so audacious, so precisely lethal, that he would destroy more enemy aircraft on the ground than any other pilot in the entire 8th Air Force. The mathematics of destruction were about to be written, not in the careful coordination of fighter sweeps and bomber escorts, but in the personal fury of a man who'd waited 5 long years for this war. 27 enemy aircraft. That was the final tally Elwin Regetti would accumulate. Not in thrilling high-altitude dogfights, but in months of brutal, low-altitude attacks, sweeping down on German airfields at altitudes measured in feet, not thousands of feet. He flew close enough to see the expressions of enemy ground crews scramble in terror before his 6 50-caliber Browning machine guns turned their world into a maelstrom of burning wreckage. The Germans had believed their remaining aircraft were safe, dispersed across dozens of hidden airfields, protected by rings of concentrated anti-aircraft fire. They were about to discover that belief would cost them the last operational remnants of the Luftwaffe. The transformation of Elwin Regetti from a quiet California rancher to the most feared ground attack pilot in the European theater had begun 5 years earlier, but his path to combat had been an agonizingly indirect one. In December of 1939, just 3 months after Germany's panzers stormed into Poland, a 24-year-old Regetti walked into an Army Air Corps recruiting office and enlisted. He was, on paper, the perfect candidate. A graduate of California Polytechnic College with a degree in animal husbandry. He was the son of Italian immigrant ranchers from the Edna Valley near San Luis Obispo. He had grown up working cattle and tending orchards on land his family had farmed for decades. But he was also a certified private pilot, a man who had spent his own hard-earned money learning to fly simply because he loved the freedom of the sky. When war erupted in Europe, he understood with an almost prophetic clarity that America would eventually be drawn in, and he wanted to be ready. His flight training records from 1940 paint a picture of an exceptional natural pilot. Instructors consistently noted his aggressive flying style, his uncanny ability to push an aircraft to its absolute limits without losing control,
and his almost instinctive grasp of aerial combat tactics, despite never having seen a shot fired in anger. By July of 1940, he'd earned his commission as a second lieutenant and pinned on his silver pilot's wings. Then came the cruelest irony of his military career. The Army Air Corps, experiencing explosive growth and desperately needing to transform tens of thousands of civilians into pilots, realized Regetti was too good. He wasn't just a good pilot, he was a phenomenal instructor. In the frantic build-up to war, every competent instructor was worth his weight in gold, and Regetti was exceptional. For the next 4 agonizing years while the world burned, while his friends and fellow pilots earned their combat wings over Germany and Japan, Elwin Regetti flew training missions in the clear skies over Texas. He taught young men how to survive in a war he himself was forbidden from fighting. He was promoted rapidly, second lieutenant to first lieutenant, captain to major, rising through the ranks based on his demonstrated brilliance at forging fighter pilots. But every promotion felt hollow, a gilded cage keeping him further from the combat he so desperately craved. His personnel file grew thick with requests for combat assignment. Each one was denied. The justification was always the same. His skills as an instructor were too valuable to the training command. His protests intensified as the war progressed. By 1944, it was clear the Allies were winning. The invasion of France had succeeded. American and British forces were driving toward Germany. Regetti could see the war ending before he ever fired a shot in anger, and the prospect tormented him. This story of frustration building into an explosive release of skill is one of the most compelling I've ever researched. If you're enjoying this deep dive into a lesser-known hero's journey, do me a favor and hit that subscribe button. Let us know in the comments where in the world you're watching from today. Finally, in October of 1944, the bureaucratic walls crumbled. Regetti's repeated, almost insubordinate requests, combined with his stellar record and the increasing need for experienced leaders in Europe, resulted in combat orders. He was assigned to the 55th Fighter Group, 8th Air Force, based at RAF Warmingford. At 29 years old, he was significantly older than most combat pilots, a lieutenant colonel by rank, but with zero combat experience. A newbie with eagles on his shoulders.
Many pilots in the 55th, some barely out of their teens, had been flying missions for over a year. They were exhausted from losses, worn down by the grinding routine of escorting bombers deep into the heart of Germany. Some resented the arrival of this older officer with all the rank and none of the experience. The 55th Fighter Group itself had a complicated history. Originally equipped with P-38 Lightnings, they converted to the superior P-51 Mustang in July 1944. Their reputation was solid but unremarkable, a competent professional unit, but not one of the headline-grabbing groups of the 8th Air Force. That was about to change forever. Regetti's assigned aircraft was a P-51D-10, serial number 4414223, which he named Katydid after his wife Catherine. It was arguably the finest fighter aircraft of World War II. Powered by a Packard-built Rolls-Royce Merlin V1657 engine, it was a thoroughbred of the skies. But Regetti saw its potential as something more brutal. Its armament was its most devastating feature for ground attack: 6 AN M2 Browning 50 caliber machine guns, 3 mounted in each wing. Each gun fired at approximately 800 rounds per minute, creating a combined rate of fire of 4,800 rounds per minute. A pilot could load a mix of ammunition: armor-piercing rounds to shred engine blocks, incendiary rounds to ignite fuel tanks, and tracer rounds to walk the stream of bullets onto the target.
At maximum rate of fire, a P-51D could unleash a 2-second burst that sent over 150 heavy-caliber slugs into a target, turning a parked airplane or a locomotive into a sieve of burning metal. For aerial combat, the P-51D was a scalpel. In Regetti's hands, for ground attack, it became a sledgehammer. From his very first missions, he demonstrated an aggressive approach that shocked his fellow pilots. While others made careful, measured strafing passes, Regetti pressed his attacks with almost reckless determination. He flew lower than regulations permitted. He made multiple passes on heavily defended targets. He hunted for airfields, locomotives, and vehicles with the focused intensity of a predator tracking prey. By late 1944, the air war had fundamentally changed. The Luftwaffe was a dying beast. Fuel shortages and overwhelming Allied superiority meant that massive dogfights were rare. The new battleground was the ground itself. Thousands of German aircraft sat parked on airfields. Locomotives moved supplies to the collapsing fronts, and trucks carried troops and ammunition. All were legitimate targets, and all were ferociously defended by increasingly desperate and accurate anti-aircraft fire, or flak. Strafing was one of the most dangerous missions a pilot could fly. At low altitude, every 20mm and 37mm cannon on the ground had a clear shot. Casualties were brutally high. Regetti didn't care. He had 5 years of waiting to make up for. His aggressive flying quickly earned him the respect of the pilots who'd initially doubted him. Within weeks, Regetti was given command of the 338th Fighter Squadron, and his men gave him a nickname that captured his relentless spirit.
Under his command, the character of the 55th Fighter Group began to transform. He developed brutal but effective tactics. Instead of single aircraft making isolated attacks, entire squadrons would hit an airfield simultaneously from multiple directions, overwhelming the defenders. He taught his pilots to press the first attack as close as possible, to use the element of surprise to inflict maximum damage on that initial, devastating strike. One of his specialties was destroying locomotives. The 55th became so proficient, they earned the informal nickname Loco Busters. In January of 1945 alone, the group destroyed an unbelievable 157 locomotives, a feat that crippled German rail capacity. But locomotives were not his primary focus. Regetti hunted aircraft. By early 1945, he was promoted to commanding officer of the entire 55th Fighter Group. But unlike other commanders, he flew more, not less. He led the most dangerous missions personally, refusing to order his men into situations he wouldn't face himself. His ground victories mounted. 27 aircraft destroyed on the ground through relentless low-altitude attacks. No other pilot in the 8th Air Force could match that number. It was a record built on 5 years of frustrated waiting, followed by 6 months of compressed fury. And on April 17th, 1945, on his 30th birthday, he would fly one final mission that would cement his legend and end his life in mystery. The final mission began like hundreds before it. The 0600 hours briefing was routine. Escort 410 B-17s to the Dresden area. But everyone knew the real action would come after the bombers turned for home, when they were released to hunt targets of opportunity. At 800 hours, the engines roared to life. Regetti climbed into Katie's cockpit, and by 900 hours, they were crossing the English coast, heading east. By 1400 hours, the bombers were safe. The sky was empty of German fighters. At 1445 hours, the radio crackled with the order Regetti had been waiting for. All fighters released to attack targets of opportunity. He didn't hesitate. He led his formation down, dropping from 18,000 feet, his eyes scanning the German countryside. Northeast of Dresden, he spotted it, Kamenz Airfield. Regetti's trained eye saw the subtle signs of an active field. "White flight, follow me down," he called. "Check for flak, we're going in." As they descended, the target became terrifyingly clear.
Kamenz was packed with Focke-Wulf FW-19 ground attack fighters, being refueled and rearmed. Flak positions erupted immediately, filling the sky with black puffs of exploding shells and streams of tracers. Regetti ignored it. At 500 feet, doing nearly 300 miles per hour, he aligned Katydid with a row of parked fighters and opened fire. The 650 calibers erupted. Armor-piercing incendiary rounds ripped through metal, fuel tanks exploded, and aircraft disintegrated in fireballs. The coordinated assault overwhelmed the German defenses. In 5 minutes of carnage, the 55th wrecked the airfield, destroying 16 FW-19s and effectively eliminating the German unit. 3 American P-51s were lost to the intense flak. But Regetti wasn't finished. As the formation regrouped, he spotted another airfield to the west, Riesa. Intelligence hadn't mentioned it, but his instincts screamed. He radioed the squadron to orbit above while he and his wingman, Lieutenant Carroll Henry, went down for a look. What they found was a fighter pilot's dream and nightmare. Riesa airfield was covered with German aircraft, dozens of them, parked in neat rows. This wasn't a combat unit. It was a collection point. Aircraft pulled back for safety. Except they weren't safe. Not anymore.
Regetti made an immediate, audacious decision. He didn't call for the rest of the squadron. He just attacked. Surprise was absolute. Katydid dropped to 200 feet. Regetti selected an FW-190 and opened fire. It erupted in flames. He was already lining up his next target, then another, his 6 machine guns firing in sustained bursts. For the first pass, the flak was minimal. By the second pass, the Germans were ready. The sky filled with fire. Regetti dove back in anyway. He made a third pass, then a fourth, each time at suicidal altitudes, each time destroying more German aircraft. His ammunition was running low. On what would be his final strafing pass, he spotted an FW-190 on final approach to land. Regetti called to his wingman, "You take him. I'll hit the ground targets." As Henry broke off to intercept the landing fighter, Regetti continued his attack. Then, his aircraft shuddered. A solid hit. Coolant temperature spiked. Oil pressure plummeted. The Packard Merlin's smooth roar became a rough, labored cough. Flak had punctured his coolant system. The engine was dying. He was at less than 300 feet over a heavily defended airfield deep inside Germany. This is the moment where a legend is truly forged, not just in victory, but in how one faces disaster. The story of what he does next is why we have to share these histories. If you believe stories like this deserve to be told, please take a moment to subscribe. It helps us continue to bring them to you. Most pilots would have panicked. Regetti's voice on the radio was chillingly calm. "I've been hit. Engines going, heading west." He pulled up, trading speed for precious altitude. White smoke streamed from the cowling. The engine seized entirely. The sudden silence was eerie, broken only by the whistle of wind. Katydid was now a 5-ton glider. He spotted a rough field ahead. He manually lowered his landing gear. 50 feet, 30, 20, he flared, touching down hard. The P-51 bounced once, slammed back down, and skidded violently across the field. Something in the cockpit struck his face, breaking his nose. Finally, it stopped. Silence. He was alive. He keyed his radio mic, his voice matter-of-fact, almost cheerful, blood streaming down his face. "Tell the family I'm okay. Broke my nose on landing. It's been a hell of a lot of fun working with you, gang. Be seeing you a little later." Above, Lieutenant Henry circled helplessly, watching his commander climb out of the downed Mustang. Regetti waved, a casual gesture that said, "I'm fine, see you back at base." With his fuel critically low, Henry had no choice but to turn for home. Below, Elwin Regetti stood beside his aircraft in a field in Germany. It was his 30th birthday. He had just personally destroyed 8 more enemy aircraft, bringing his ground total to 27, the highest in the 8th Air Force. He was alive, relatively uninjured, and had just radioed his position. The war would be over in 20 days. Rescue seemed not just possible, but likely.
And then, nothing. Elwin Guido Regetti vanished. No German prisoner of war records ever listed his name. No camp registries, no interrogation reports. When the war ended, massive efforts were made to account for missing personnel. Regetti's name appeared nowhere. His aircraft was never found. No wreckage, no crash site, no grave. It was as if he had simply been erased from the earth. Back home, his family waited for a telegram that never came. The most likely and most brutal explanation is that Regetti was murdered by German civilians. By April 1945, Germany was a nation in collapse. Years of Allied bombing had fostered a deep, burning hatred for Allied airmen, who were often seen as terror flyers. Numerous documented cases exist of downed pilots being lynched by angry mobs, sometimes with the encouragement of local Nazi officials. An American pilot, in his flight suit in a heavily bombed region, would have been an immediate target for revenge. American investigators tried to reconstruct his fate after the war, but the area where he went down fell into the Soviet occupation zone, severely complicating the search. The Cold War descended, and the trail went cold forever. Today, over 80 years after his disappearance, Elwin Regetti is still officially listed as missing in action. His name is carved on the tablets of the missing at the Henri Chapelle American Cemetery in Belgium, but there is no grave. His legacy, however, is undeniable. 27 enemy aircraft destroyed on the ground, a record born of a relentless, aggressive approach to combat. He was a leader who transformed an average unit into one of the best by personal example, always leading from the front, always taking the greatest risks himself. The pilots who flew with him remembered Eager L with a mixture of awe and respect. He had survived hundreds of missions, only to disappear after a survivable crash landing, just days before the end of the war. The Distinguished Service Cross he was awarded posthumously recognized his extraordinary heroism, but no medal could solve the mystery of his fate. His story is a testament to the quiet rancher who became a storm of destruction, a pilot who arrived late to the war and compressed 5 years of waiting into 6 months of furious, calculated fury. He is a forgotten hero of World War II, a ghost in a German field, whose final chapter remains unwritten. Thank you so much for watching and for supporting the channel. The story of Elwin Regetti is a powerful reminder of the individual courage and sacrifice that can so often be lost in the grand scale of history. If you haven't already, please consider subscribing for more detailed historical breakdowns. Your support is what makes it all possible. We'll see you in the next one.